right, everyone. Welcome to the STOA. Today we have Luea Ritter and Nancy Zam from Collective Transitions. And on their website, it says restoring, rewiring, holding, building shared capacity for fostering and maintaining transformational shifts. And I don't really know what Collective Transitions do, but it sounds pretty cool and the website looks pretty awesome. And Luea was on a series previously on the STOA called Soul Shivers. And her energy is beautiful. She's just a beautiful human being. So I reached out to see if she would like to do something else at the STOA. And she suggested a session on stewardship. And as some of you might know, at the STOA, I call myself the steward of the STOA. And I don't really know why I call myself the steward of the STOA, but it feels right. And I kind of stumbled on that term, which we might talk about. And so Luea suggested that Nancy, me, and her engage in a dialogue about it. So how today's going to work, I'm going to take in Luea and Nancy in a moment, but they're going to just chat about what Collective Transitions is. And then the three of us are going to have a conversation on stewardship for maybe about 20-30 minutes, and then we'll pivot to kind of a collective dialogue, Q&A or statement. So if you have any kind of questions or thoughts you'd like to share, just kind of indicate it in the chat now, or anytime it emerges, I should say. And then I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and share your thought or ask your question. This will be on YouTube, so if you don't want to be YouTube, just indicate that. And if everyone can maybe turn off their camera for the first portion. So it's just the three of our faces show on the YouTube channel, and then we'll invite you back in near the end. So I think that is everything. Luea, Nancy, welcome to the STOA. You like it when I say STOA, don't you?
It has a very nice sound. Yeah, it opens up space. I feel with the OA. Yeah, great to be here again. Thank you, Peter, for this invitation, and I'm very bubbly being in conversation about this actually question around what stewardship may mean and may offer for the times we live in. Maybe just to give a bit of context around collective transitions, it all started with the question, how do we actually do collective transitions? Quite some years back now, like acknowledging we all can go through personal transformation and transition times, but actually how do we do that in a coherent way with teams, groups, organization, and even larger ecologies, social ecologies. And acknowledging there is this beautiful space in between that we often think we can just jump over, but there is such a lot of beauty in it, even though it's often very messy, uncertain, discombobulated. And yeah, collective transitions is in a way a space with different branches, including an inner kitchen and our innovation lab, where we want to sit with these questions and also practice together of how can we actually be in times of transition such as we experience right now, building capacity together, not only individually but also as collectives, muscles, train muscles, have these gyms for the more subtle aspects that we sometimes maybe even not know how to value or how to name even, that are informing power dynamics, leadership dynamics, whole group dynamics, and especially are informing why we currently sit with quite a lot of crises, honestly, and how we work with the root causes in a more empowered way, let's say, rather than shy away, but be with. So collective transitions is in a way, in my own words, like an offering a space that we collectively need to co-create together. So yeah, Nancy, Sam, over to you.
I think that was beautifully said. I feel like it might be helpful just to share the kind of spark that brought us together, because I think it relates to stewardship in a sense. So it might be a nice bridge. When I met Luea, there was almost like this recognition of a language and a way of making the implicit more explicit that created a settling feeling, at least in my system. I worked in social innovation for 10 years, 20 years, and noticed all these patterns. It's almost like I'm having like a, a side conversation or like a side life over here. And then I'm doing the work over here and wondering like why there's sort of this phenomenon of this mirroring happening. And, we're working on these issues on the outside, and then all these similar patterns and dynamics come up on the inside of the team. Not sure what to do with, like, how to create space for those kind of deeper conversations, and how that relates to collective capacities. So yeah, I think together it's sort of like, all right, like you got the muscles and the bones and the skeleton structures that are really easy to see, using a body metaphor. And then there's also this, like, what actually creates a sense of aliveness and congruency and, connection. And how do we also make those things visible and valuable? So I think, part of what drew me to this conversation and what sparked the idea is seeing Peter in another call and being like, how is he doing that? What is he doing? Just noticing there's sort of like an artistry of how he was weaving together, different, it was just like for a moment, but it was so pronounced. It was my first introduction to Stoa, and just kind of seeing behind the scenes, sort of curiously, like, how is he weaving these conversations together and empowering these different people? And it's like, what is his role? Who is this? It was so kind of in my field very noticeable. And so this conversation is sort of to spark, like, let's deepen that. Like, what is actually happening behind the scenes? How do you create, a community that feels like nourishing and fun and alive, and tickle sort of the senses, like you say, Luea. So yeah, so I think that's what brings us here today. Do you want to say more, Luea, about the what sparked this call and what you're hoping for today?
Yeah, I think stewardship is something that we also are very curious in our work, when kind of how we navigate that space that is unknown, that uncharted territory where we can't say we are guides or leaders, but we are actually uncovering as we go. And there is also a sense of caretaking of a field that is growing, and that I see especially also in the work that you're doing, Peter, with the Stoa. And so that inquiry in, like, what does it take to tend to a field of, and there are other people, like, for example, Ria with Steward, in a way, collective presencing or so. There are emerging pockets of communities and circles that are tended to by a smaller core group or team. And yeah, so I'm curious to hear from you, Peter, also around how this name dropped in. You didn't want to share it before, so I'm really curious to hear it. And also, like, what are the capacities that this requires from us, and we offer to others by that, or that we strengthen also in each other?
Yeah. And presence, sort of a tension I'm feeling right now is, like, as I was telling you beforehand, I like sort of being almost invisible, but like holding the space or field in when I'm at the Stoa. And so I'm not really an active participant in a lot of the dialogues that are occurring. And so the tension is to be fully in this dialogue, but also kind of being that stewarding role, whatever this is, not only administratively, like letting people into the room, but like kind of making sure everyone's having a beautiful time. I was going to say a good time, but a beautiful time, which probably will come up in a moment. And yeah, I remember when I started the Stoa, it's like I have a proclivity for like jazzy names, like, and nothing. It's like I kind of geek out of like making up concepts or just using concepts that are maybe like unusual. And there's like a pretentious kind of side to that. I acknowledge it and honor that. But there also is, like, I think in times of transition, we're in a collective transition, that kind of new concepts might be needed, or old concepts might need to be revived in order to get like what it really is the thing that is needed, or what we're looking at or doing. Anyway, so I had like, I was like, well, I can't call myself an organizer of the Stoa. I don't want to call myself like what am I going to call myself here? And I just kind of like did like a thesaurus thing. And then Steward came up. I'm like, that feels right. I vibe with that. I don't even think I look at the definition. I'm just kind of like vaguely aware of it. And I picked that and called myself the Steward of the Stoa. And I recall someone emailed me, I have had their email up, and he said, you call yourself the Steward, a noble distinction from the Shepherd King. It implies a looseness of grip to the process. And then he said some few other things, and I actually looked up like what the steward meant in like Wikipedia, and then it's a role appointed by the legal ruling monarch to represent them in a country who has a mandate to govern in their name. During that time, I was going through this kind of spiritual crisis. I was plugged into something really interesting, and then this line, like, the steward does not own his lord's house, right? And I said it in a very spiritual sense, and that's what it kind of feels like, this loose grip here in this. When I often talk about the daemon or the daimon, that energy of this place, and I am weaving a lot of these different people together, and all these sub communities are emerging, and there's no financial contracts here. But I like to call it a daimonic contract, just sensing the aliveness within the person, and then inviting that into this space and trying to get into right relationship with it. And you can't hold too tightly, because it might not be forever, and it shouldn't be forever. So yeah, that's what came alive when you asked me the origins of the name Steward.
Beautiful. And what I really like is that right relationship that you mentioned. But for me, this is also something, I mean, how I idealize maybe the older definition of stewards, but you're being given the responsibility of caretaking for land, basically, and to ensure that how you hand it over to a next person or a next generation, that the relationship of that land with its inhabitants, and in my eyes, I include, trees, animals, the soil, and the human beings equal, that they are in healthy relationship, that they're in mutual reciprocity with each other. And yeah, that just rings a tone for me when you say that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think what struck me is this, like, I'm not an owner. It's like you're serving the whole, and you're tending to the parts sort of as they need support, or as they need, almost like a gardener, or, like everything kind of has a natural rhythm, and different things need tending at different times. It's very different, I think, to, like, my brain wants to skip and like look at other contexts to make sense of like what that means to tend to the whole and not the part. It's sort of like consultancy, often you go in with a really specific role, and then, but you may lose sight with that view of like how things are actually operating and what effects it has through the whole system. Yeah. And I don't know how, yeah, I was going to go on a thread, but how, I feel like there's like an interest of like, what are the characters? Yeah, we're kind of talking about what are the characteristics of stewardship. There's a being with, is what I've heard, and what that means. And then what else?
One thing that's coming up is so when Daniel Wall came to the Stoa, he had this line on us, chef's kiss, it's so beautiful, is that we have to be in this kind of collective transition that we're in right now. We have to be hospice workers of a dying world or a dying system, and we have to be midwifers of a new world, new system. Mm-hmm. And to use some of the the game A, game B terminology that some people might be aware of, it's like I like to use the game in between, and you have to have kind of like a talent stack, this unusual talent stack, and perhaps like the stewarding role is needed, is one of the skills needed for this game in between. And I am interested in sort of like stewarding in a local domain, like sort of like say a corporation transitioning, and then stewarding in this more collective domain. It's like this game A to game B type thing. And I do like this idea of teasing out, let's say, the movements like being with that are needed in both domains, in the localized stewardship and then the kind of maybe the more global stewardship.
I get this image that you're saying is it's almost like a wish, like some sort of phasing, almost like a birth or a doulaship, or where different times need different things. There might be a moment in time that needs full attention. Other times may need, depending on the phase and depending on sort of what the movement of the whole is through that transition. Is that what you're meaning?
Mm-hmm.
Luea, how do you define stewardship?
Yeah, it was just when you both spoke now, what I feel is that it needs my daring to fully immerse myself into that also unknown with the system. So it's not to kind of, stay an outsider and kind of observe. It needs that observing capacity, but through a deep immersion and listening in a way. What is there right now? I feel, in at least how I've experienced it, it goes often really literally through my body. So also to acknowledge like what happens inside of me is a mirror of the outside and vice versa. And I see that also, Peter, I don't know, that's my interpretation of your emails and your sharings and your writings is also in a way observing what's happening inside you, and may also, tracing out some patterns or dynamics that may also are alive in the outside. But that full immersion with all my senses and kind of being almost radical in that of daring to meet my own fears, daring to meet my own limits, and staying connection, like not going out of connection. Maybe I take a little bit of distance if it gets too hot or intense, but I'm staying with in partnership. That commitment to the process and knowing it's unfolding, and it's a practice in a way. I feel like stewardship is not something you get labeled and then you do X, Y, Z and it's fully kind of cleared out and tasked out what you have to do, but it's a practice that needs my daily attention in a way, and sometimes it will stumble and it's messy, and I think one thing that also feels really critical is like it needs a field to hold the field. So I need other orientation points and reference points. In that case, like, Nancy, Sam, and I are to each other, but often we also have other people helping us to see actually maybe dynamics we are in or things that we may need to tend to or reflect with us together. So also that idea, it's not the big leader or the hero or the heroine that is the steward, but it's actually, I feel like, at least for now, it's more a collective co-holding and co-listening to a field that calls our attention. That's already maybe there as a potential, but that needs in a way our active engagement to make itself more manifest, maybe also.
And I have a curiosity of how both of you with collective transitions, like how does it actually look like stewarding and other people's transitions?
I have a metaphor that's been coming in around, like I worked with, I think before we go into how it applies in our work, something around, I worked with supply chains for 10 years and I was like, how do we actually, there's so much work that's actually the care that's provided to ecosystems, which is supporting, a lot of the things that would support the SDG goals, but that's not valued by a market. So how do you, there's sort of these clear distinctions between like what actually care does, to a community, to a product, a quality, to health overall, to the ecosystem. And we don't have a way to value it in our market system. So that's sort of a longer story, but it's sort of like these recipes of like what I heard Luea say, commitment and care and curiosity. And it's like, how does that actually come into practice? I think is sort of like, for me, that there's a more tangible rootedness in things that we all touch, which is food. You can understand what happens if the food is really cared for, and there's a craft to it, and there's attention to, yeah, at every step of the way as it passes hands from one step or the other through each, you know, the farmer to the intermediary to the maker, and how it's digested and how that can bring about, you know, health for the whole, sort of the whole system. And I think there's it's a role, so switching kind of to collective transitions, it's a role that's often invisible. I think you were saying that, Peter, you're saying like sometimes I feel invisible, that, you know, you're trying not to assert in any one role or any one position, but you're really seeing how things are moving together. And you're tending to that to make sure that there's this, you know, smooth flow and a smooth dialogue, and everyone sort of feels empowered to do their best and kind of be present and share in the way that feels heart-centered and supportive. And often that role is not as valued often because it's not seen as much, you know. So I think with collective transitions, I've noticed that what can actually be accomplished, you know, in the actual speed and efficiency that can happen in an organization when we're tending to the parts that often aren't seen as much. So we often look at capacities, we also look at root causes, and we take time and space to go to those layers rather than focus on just the activities that need to be done. We look at like, well, why aren't the activities getting done? What's the block, or what's the potential? And then we go into kind of another level and look at and create space for that unfolding to really see kind of with our senses what else is present and what are those patterns that are making that dynamic. Luea, do you have anything to add to that, or what's your perspective?
Yeah, maybe it's beautiful how you described it. Maybe there's also a difference between stewarding collective transitions as a field that is, you know, emerging, unfolding, growing, shifting, and then offering that capacity in a way also to other people, other organizations, other processes, as a form of, you could say, you know, service, where we are holding space and are supporting the process, not to guide it and to lead it and say this and this has to happen, but to kind of almost like a riverbed, help the system to see itself more and more fully and start to activate its own sometimes healing potential or healing energies or its own collective intelligence and wisdom. So these are kind of slightly different levels of how I feel we are practicing stewardship in our context. But I think one of the core layers is what you also spoke to, Peter, before, is we need to be invited. Like there's no way we can say, oh yeah, we come in and do that. What sometimes in the development world is, or projects happen, like, okay, I see there a problem. If we put this solution into place, then everything will be solved. No, we actually may see a potential, but it actually needs the invitation of at least a part of the system, that we even have the right to be present with it, not to say work with it, but even just to have, you know, to be given that that responsibility, of course. Yeah. I'm curious, Peter, to hear what that being a steward of the Stoa requires from you, or also brings to you. Like, what do you feel in that, more or less a year now, or more than a year? What do you feel you have grown into, and maybe also what have you shedded in order to really allow that steward role to become more present in your way of being?
Yeah, a few thoughts emerge and they might be fragmented. Let's see if we can weave them together. And I'm getting a sense, like, I don't know if the way I hold the word steward and what I'm doing here is the same as what you two are doing with collective transitions. And there's a curiosity that emerged when, like, transitioning in the local way, like in, say, a corporation, and how that's connected with that kind of global transition. How do you see that? That's a curiosity that came up for me. A few other things that came up more related to the question that you just asked was beauty. I want a beautiful experience given the constraints of this thing. And that's really the through line through everything here at the Stoa. And something about being all in. You mentioned that, Luea. It's like, you're in it. And one of the models, I like that 3-part epistemic model. There's like third person, which is objective truth, scientific literacy, logical reasoning. And then there's a second person, which is that intersubjective, like really being able to go in someone else's reality and understand them. And then there's that first person, which is more of that embodied stuff. And I think all of those different ways of knowing need to be in right relationship with one another, and we need to have them all in. And I think there's like a great poverty with the second person, the first person in a lot of places. And it's just all about kind of like objective truth. What is this? And that kind of that more penetrative, you got to do this. And I think that's why a lot of people are vibing with my journals, and a lot of people are reporting synchronicities when they're reading it, because I'm just trying earnestly to be all in it. And I was invited to be all in it too, in a way. It's like, yeah, I feel called to do it. And doing that for over a year now, it has been very therapeutic, integrative. A lot of good stuff has been happening for me personally. And I think a lot of people are benefiting from this place. But yeah, those are I don't know if I answered your question directly, Luea, but that's what came alive when you asked it.
Thank you.
I'm curious, how is it for you now to be visible in the role and talk about it? What's your experience?
Well, there's machinations of how I can do this conversational jiu-jitsu or keto move to kind of like switch it back to you two. So there's always that machination going on. And then there's that kind of, again, that sensitivity of, are people find this interesting? Like, I don't want this to be a Peter show. So yeah, there's that kind of like tension I'm feeling. But then there's also kind of like a joy of like kind of finding the intersection of where we're at with the stewardship thing and getting more nuanced, not only at a propositional, but a felt sense level of what this thing is.
And just for context, what sparked Stoa in the first place? Like, what was that impulse, and how does it relate to your role now?
Well, I had some bad news before this place started. My wife and I possibly couldn't have children. And then COVID happened at the same time. And then I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? I don't know how to live my life. All my life was kind of designed for a certain way. And then there was a big existential crisis. And then I just sort of like, you know what? I don't know how to live my life and no one else does. What do I do? And so I kind of just handed the keys to a more intuitive energy, what I call the daemon, and then birthed the stoa, this thing. And I kind of went mad too during the first few phases, but there felt like there was something quite right about it. So yeah, something felt important to say. That felt important to say for some reason. The potentiality of not having kids. Well, there's good news. We might be able to have it. We got some good news from the doctor recently, so that's positive. But something about not having kids and then birthing something like this felt quite kind of at least poetically significant.
And following your intuitive guidance, letting it flow out.
Yeah, that bad news coupled with COVID really just afforded listening to something else. is really just running with it and trusting with it, and seeing where it led. And it led to quite a delicious place.
Have you seen in your own journey, like transition moments, like phases, I guess, phases of growth?
Yeah, and all presence that, like, the conversation about keto moves are really coming on strong right now. I'll put them on pause.
I know, I'll switch over just one more. It came up. I'm doing the same thing, so we have it's fun.
Yeah. Transition moments. Yeah, and you know, like, I had over 300 journal entries, and they're all kind of documented on them, like kind of how I got spiritually upgraded or character upgraded during this whole process. And there's specific moments I guess I can get into, but it's just getting right relationship with a lot of emotional realities, and like collaborative muscle has increased like tenfold, and just my network via what I call net playing, just following and doing cool stuff, has increased. And then being able to not only sense into this daimonic intuitive energy in myself, but also sense it in others, and speak to them in that way. Yeah.
That might have been what I noticed that first call. Like the things you said were so precise, and it kind of like stopped the conversation for a second. And then there's something that kind of caught in a different way, a different level, higher level. It's just a feeling that I remember, less about the content.
Just one thing before we may be open to hearing questions and insights from people. I just want to share that I feel in the stories of the three of us, there was always collective transitions, and also then how Nancy and I met was always related with an existential crisis that we moved through, and were in a way, you know, lost at sea or in that space between. So it's just, I don't want to say this is directly related with stewardship now, but I just find it interesting that it seems to be a red thread through the stories of why we are here with these, you know, tending to these different fields together.
And perhaps we can invite other people in now, but the question I'm having right now, and it's quite salient, is what's the relationship with unknowingness, like not knowing, with stewardship, like being in right relationship with that, both on the local domain and then the global domain. It seems like that's something in common. So shall we bring people in? Cool. Yeah. So everyone, let there be light in the stoa. You can turn on your camera. And maybe we'll call in a few people. I haven't been following the chat, but Sarah, looked like you had a few questions and statements. Do you mind if we take you in?
Well, thanks. No, actually, we're discussing with Max in parallel about stewardship and how would job titles look like, or stewardship oriented company actually look like, because indeed it makes Max straight out that it would make sense to reframe the jobs of our politicians as stewards and not as leaders, and I think it really makes sense. And then yeah, like what would it actually look like a stewardship company, stewardship oriented legal system also, and I guess New Zealand is going toward it through giving human rights to nature. And actually I'm wondering if there are some people that work on it, or interesting initiatives around it, because it really makes sense. So that's not exactly, well, that can be a question. What do you think about it? Maybe Max has some stuff to add also.
Yeah, I can otherwise go. Thank you for that. And indeed, I think a big part, our world would look different if we would approach it from that sense of almost humble servantship and listening to a system, what it wants versus what we think it should become or should be, or should change towards. For me, there is this capacity in it to drop away my own wishes and needs and expectations versus to having a deep sense of listening to what's already there and wants to kind of, further tended to. And in a way, it relates also, I mean, if you now look to land stewardship also as a practice from, centuries back, there's also like, what's beyond my time, like what's beyond my life, and what is serving the generations to come, which I think is a red thread through all indigenous practices, no matter where on the world, including, Western civilization has had that too. We just lost it and forgot about it. Where you're not so much like, how is my success helping me, but how is my success helping others? And that being given a gift, that ensuring that how you hand it over later is in the same state or even more beautiful than when you have received it. And in terms of companies, yeah, I actually wonder, it's a question now I'm sitting with as you bring that up. Does that work in the capitalistic economy that we currently still are living in? Like, yeah, I think it's a bold statement to, and I think there are companies who are doing it invisibly in a way, like really listening deeply, like, okay, we are working in that market economy, but we are serving our, beneficiaries. I think it's a very tricky business. I mean,
yeah, we had this conversation a few days ago too, thinking about it. We were like, how does it fit this role? Is it kind of like a nonprofit director looking out for the whole? Is it like a land steward? When do you have your stewardship hat on? When do you have it off? Can you be a participant and still steward? I mean, I think there's a sense, I feel like there's also a mindset shift that happens, and it's sort of how you're tending to the group and how you're leading and what you view leadership as. And sort of what you're driven and motivated by. There's kind of touching on your question, Peter, around how do you navigate the unknown? It's kind of like really being with what is happening, which means, I mean, there's a deep listening of like, instead of just plowing ahead towards an objective, always, if something's coming up that actually needs attention, actually taking the time and space to go into that. And in that process, you start to find your footing in the unknown, like you're actually being with the actual experiences as they're happening. And through that process of sensing and observing, you can start to find footing where you didn't know you had. So rather than relying on the footing being like an external, plan, you're actually really sensing into the moment and the input that you have with your team, the input that you're getting from the land. Taking space to sense into that is also a form, I think, of stewardship, and it could be a leadership shift rather than. But I agree with Luea. Often it's just that's not, the mindsets aren't driven for that. We always want to feel safe. We want to have the 5-year plan, like kind of seeing the outcomes of what we're going to actually put time and money into before we start. So it's a big shift.
Amit had some thoughts in the chat related to this.
Yeah, I mean, what a fantastic conversation on stewardship. Thank you all. Just two interesting things. The first, on the model of stewardship in the commercial space, there actually are a number of companies who actually have a stewarding model, and they've separated, the best ones have separated ownership and stewardship within their organization. So Carlsberg, for example, like there are a few Northern European, Nordic country companies on stock markets that are stewarded companies. And so the assets are typically owned by a foundation that often has the clarity of having the voting shares, and that it will not sell the asset. So the asset's protected. And the responsibility of governing the entire organization, including employee compensation, management compensation, is in the hands of the stewards of the company, which are its employees. So really phenomenal model, because of course everyone wonders, can you do this in a public market situation? And you can, and those companies perform typically significantly better. I heard some number like 3 times, but I haven't validated that, but significantly better than their counterparts that are not stewarded. So that's really awesome. Another company in the UK is called John Lewis, but their employees hold shares as well as run the business. And so when you don't separate ownership and stewardship completely, it can taint, those things can taint each other. And employee-based stock compensation plans that were installed in the 70s distorted the CEO's role as steward and made him a shareholder. And all of a sudden, companies that had been built for hundreds of years or decades started to crumble because of this stock market driven behavior, this kind of quarterly behavior versus long-term behavior of their stewards. I had one other comment, but let me stop there for a second.
I was just going to jump on what you said, just because my question was not completely innocent. It's something I'm having a review right now. Like in the Netherlands, you also have like a startup studio focused on climate change that is starting to work on new modes of incorporation that would be based on stewardship. And I didn't have time to deep dive on it, but and how to, because all the modes of incorporation currently we have PLC, private companies do not offer the opportunity of having stewardship roles because they were built in a Adam Smith spirit, and this is a big issue actually. And so I'm super curious about how does it evolve, and because I think it's a then it's more like I'm in the climate change sector, and I think it's absurd to put so much millions for startups that are working in the old way. I mean, we should put it on startups for climate change that would be in the stewardship way. It makes no sense to be techno-solutionist for the climate transition. It would not work. So yeah, just to add in the debate.
Sorry, Sarah, I didn't get what you said, the example in the Netherlands. I'm from the Netherlands, and I was just wondering, can you say a little bit more for me?
Sure.
Also
So the name is Metabolic Explorer. These guys are focused on circular economy, which is the area I used to be involved in. And there are consulting companies. They built a startup studio. Actually, they've got a call within a few days on the stewardship incorporation. And you also have the guys from Evolute 6 in the UK who built the model of fair shares. There is like 4 initiatives on it to try to, well, then once you've said it, I think the big issue with it when you have legal innovation is how do you spread it? Because it can very easily remain very niche. So, and can you scale it up also? Because I'm based in France and we've had a lot of types of companies that includes employee ownership and all, but it always works for small structures. It doesn't scale up. So yeah, that's also a huge question. Like, what is stewardship at large scale? How do you handle it? But I think it's a shame there's not more people working on it actually, or maybe there are. And
yeah, large scale. I mean, there's natural stewards. They may or may not always be in the role, but like the UN, I think would be a good large scale steward.
But before I pivot to Ola's question, which might be the last question, Amit, you said you had some other comments?
Oh yeah, the other just quick observation was the role of the steward kind of back in a microscopic and also in a transitionary space, that a lot of people might mistake the role of steward as facilitator. And as I was listening to you, what really occurred to me is that the role of facilitator is an external role to an organization or an entity, whereas the role of steward is almost at the center of the community. They're like the black hole inside of a toroidal field. You know, you create the safe space or the container and attract people in it. So it's really, you're creating a space that is of service to everyone. And it's not like you have this external role, you have an internal role. So maybe it's really like you're the heart of the community. Or I really liked his comment about that you're helping the community see itself better. So you're kind of driving the community's consciousness, awareness of itself is driven through the holding of this of the steward.
Mm-hmm.
And the last point I'd like to make about that is I'm curious, if that's the rule, are you then therefore really the center of that collective consciousness in that moment in time? That in fact, because there's a steward, this field can occur, and you are genuinely at the center of that field. I mean, we're all in the field, but that it would be much harder for these collective moments to occur. They're much easier to occur when you have that person, whether it's Nancy or yourself or whoever's holding the space. That person is required for that to occur.
That was really good. First of all, I thought that was awesome. That framing. Yeah.
I would refrain saying at the center, because I think within alive living systems, you can't say there is a center, or it's constantly moving. It's constantly, the point of attention is shifting. So I see it more as a dance, but I resonate a lot with what you're saying, creating that attractor, kind of calling in all the good stuff and activate, like where you in a way hold space. You're not facilitating to a specific step, but you're there present with the system. And I think that's where I was speaking before about this immersion. You have to immerse yourself fully. It's not just as a steward. I feel if you're invited as a steward, I can't steward 10 projects at the same time, because they work me. they work through me, with me, on me, day and night. So it's a whole other, on a legal term, you could say contract energetically that you make with such a work, than saying I'm coming in, giving you some facilitation and go out again. Yet I do know facilitators who approach their work like that as well. So I think, yeah, there's also a question of, from which mindset or worldview or paradigm or way of being you're coming from.
Yeah, I like the inquiry, and my mind goes to like looking at a map of a rainforest, like what is the, what are these, like, how would that apply? Or like in the body, is it the soft tissue kind of metaphor that's, working to create these little, like the mechanisms in which our cells are communicating, and how things have a natural state of health and aliveness, like what's, it's an inquiry. I don't have an answer. It's one of those things that it's like none of the parts, but it's the space in between, and it's caring for those. So once you put it into a place, then it, like, I noticed there's somewhat of a distortion again. So it's a question, it's an inquiry that I have too, of how to like hold it and name it, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. What came up for me, I just really loved your distinctions. I mean, I thought that was they're helping me understand the stewarding thing. And I consciously viewed the facilitation role that I have here at the STOA, or when someone is coming in as a facilitator, distinct than the stewarding role. And I really like that distinction between ownership and stewardship. And perhaps this might sound a little corny, but I think ownership engenders fear and stewardship engenders love. And so it's kind of like having a distinct role, so you can kind of really lean into it. Yeah.
And I like the verb you use too. Stewarding feels easier to say than a stewardship is a thing. I don't know.
And I love your point on love, because it makes me think it includes healing what is broken, and helping what wants to grow, which is not included at all in ownership.
Right. So perhaps we can sneak in one more question. Ola, you had a question.
Yes. Thank you for coming to the STOA today. So my question is around being an effective steward, and the skill sets needed to be an effective steward, as well as how to be a steward without this skill set. And I would also like tag in one last question about how to be an attractor, because like I can go all day strip teasing my smart signaling and everything, and I'm not attracting anyone at the end of the day. And even if I'm
Did we lose Ola? Yeah, I think we lost him. Ola, are you there?
Yes, I'm back. So yeah, so around you know, being that attractor, how do you become an attractor? And yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
These are one of these questions that we could sit the whole rest of our lives probably with. It's beautiful. I think the only thing that I can say from experience is when I attracted is when I was daring to let go and surrender to life happening through me and to that unknown. Then things started to fall into place that I may never have been able to dream up or dream into, or project myself towards. So that's the only thing I can kind of grasp here for that question. If I allow to work with life, basically, and not knowing what that is, and not kind of boxing or framing it in a, like, similar to what you said, Peter, of how the Stoa came into being, where the expectation or the frame or the story you told yourself what to be and how to live fell and crumbled apart. Yeah, but I don't know if that's if that's the characteristic of attractor. But, yeah.
And leaning into that unknown, like leaning into the, not just kind of the void, but really the calling or the inspiration or the self-trust or the voice inside rather than the voices outside.
And what came up for me is what Luea said in the beginning. You got to be invited. Seems like the attractor is like a second thing, and the invitation is the first thing, and it's your choice to accept that invitation, whether you're working for or stewarding a local setting with a corporation, or you're doing something a little bit more weird like the Stoa. And then there's another question. I'll just read it and answer it briefly. It's like, how can the steward concept, how we steward it to spread it around? I think that's what we're doing right here, essentially. Accepting Luea's invitation to have this kind of conversation about stewardship. It's going to be of service to that. So to close out, I'll just hand it to Luea and Nancy to any kind of thoughts that are alive that you'd like to leave us with.
I have this little tiny paragraph from we do work called system sensing. And so I sensed into stewardship a few weeks ago in this exercise. And can I read one small paragraph, So I'm speaking from the view of stewardship, and this, I don't know how this came, but I'm reading it now and it seems to fit our conversation. So it says, integrate me with the work. I am the space, the steadiness, the care, the curiosity, the weaving of parts of relationship, of being with, that informs a sense of emergence and aliveness to actualize the purpose of the work. I don't know if that fits, but I'll leave that here. It's been a pleasure to be in this conversation. It's fun to make it explicit and valuable, and it's been fun to weave with everyone here.
Please copy that in the chat, Nancy. Yeah, I leave bubbly, and I have an urge or a curiosity to continue with this conversation, and also that difference between a stewarding role in a process and where you help a system to move through something, and how that transforms into or shows up in more legal frameworks, or how that shows up in local frameworks where we are stewards of land, or and what feels alive to me is like I feel tickled under my feet of like ancient knowledge that we here unfortunately have kind of forgotten, that there are still practiced by people who are more closer to their First Nation impulses maybe, or indigenous roots. So it feels also like a space where we can, acknowledge we are still toddlers, while there are people who are already adults in that practice, where we can also learn from again. So also, I also want to honor that there are stewards out there who could be great teachers to us for these different questions, actually. So I'm curious to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, same. And a lot of people were saying this was such a meaningful discussion, and I feel I feel nourished by it. So greatly appreciated the invitation, Luea and Nancy, to have this conversation. I don't like being in the STOA actually, like an active participant, but I quite enjoyed this. And perhaps a series could emerge on stewardship where we can invite some of the corporate individuals that are already engaged in it, or some of the people with the indigenous wisdom. That would be quite cool to kind of steward this concept. So before I make some closing announcements, Luea and Nancy, thank you so much for coming to the STOA today. It's a pleasure seeing you both again. And I'll just plug the event we have today at 6 p.m. Eastern time on shadow sense making. So if you want to sense make into your shadow, or sense make with your shadow, you can come. It's a free event on the STOA, thestoa.ca. So that being said, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the STOA.
Thank you, Peter.